Buenas and Hafaday, and welcome to the People's House, the Guam Congress Hall, here in the heart of our island's capital, Hagåtña. This public hearing conducted by the Committee on Education, Public Safety, and the Arts is called to order at 2:17 Chamorro Standard Time. Notice of the hearing was disseminated to all local media outlets on July 13, 2023, with second notice provided on July 18th. Notice of the hearing was also made known on the Guam Legislature's website and the Government of Guam Public Notices portal. This afternoon, the committee is holding a public hearing to discuss Bill number 71-37 COR, which is an act to add a new subsection 51-101B12 and amend 51-102A3, all of Chapter 51, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to adding the Director of Parks and Recreation and the Department of Revenue and Tax Criminal Investigation Supervisor as voting members of the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, and to make technical corrections. This is an act that I introduced with co-sponsors Senators Chris Dueñas, my Vice Chair, Sabina, Flores, Perez, Senator Fisher, Senator William Parkinson, Senator Frank Blas Jr., Senator Jesse Lujan, and Senator Roy A.B. Quinata. Upon conclusion of Bill number 71, we'll take a 5-minute recess. Okay, to hear testimony on Bill number 113-37 LS, an act to amend subsection 3103P of Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to restoring the Guam Department of Education Management Audit requirements, which I also authored along with co-sponsor Speaker Teresa Lai, Senator Sabina, Flores, Perez. We'll also be hearing testimony on Bill number 105-37 LS, an act to add a new subsection 4124B, 3 of Chapter 4, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to allowing school and village beautification as service learning hours, sponsored by Senator Joe S. San Agustin, as well as Bill number 91-37 COR, an act to add a new subsection 3134 of Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to temporary employment of Guam Department of Education retired facilities and maintenance personnel, sponsored by Senator Joe S. San Agustin and myself. I'd like to welcome my colleagues joining us today, Senator Tello Taitagui and Senator Joe S. San Agustin. Before we begin, I'd like to go over the general rules of conduct. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by the chair before speaking and shall state their name for record-keeping purposes. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or motive of any senator or individual testifying is not permitted. The chair of the committee may order the removal from a hearing any member of a legislatura and Guahan who fails to observe proper decorum pursuant to our standing rules. Any violation of this general rule of conduct will result in the removal from the hearing by the host. And we will now proceed with discussions on Bill 71-37 COR, sponsored by myself, Senator Chris Barnett, my Vice Chair, Senator Chris Dueñas, Senator Sabina Flores Perez, Senator Thomas J. Fisher, Senator William A. Parkinson, Senator Frank Blas Jr., Senator Jesse A. Lujan, and Senator Roy A.B. Quinata. The bill is an act to add a new subsection 51-101B12 and amend 51-102A3, all of Chapter 51, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to adding the Director of Parks and Recreation and the Department of Revenue and Taxation Criminal Investigation Supervisor as voting members of the Peace Officers Standards and Training Post Commission, and to make technical corrections. The enactment of this bill will create representation for Department of Parks and Recreation, park rangers, and Department of Revenue and Tax criminal investigators on the Peace Officers Standards and Training, the Post Commission. The Post Commission was created to develop training standards for law enforcement officers and firefighters. Although there are post-secondary degree and certificate programs in subjects such as criminal justice, most law enforcement training programs are conducted by the agencies that are actually involved in the employment of the law enforcement officer. And of course, we wanted to add these park rangers and the DRT law enforcement that kind of solidify the post-commission lineup. And that being said, we're now open to hear testimony on Bill 71-37. I would just like to note that I did speak with the Director and Deputy Director of the Department of Revenue and Taxation late yesterday afternoon, and they indicated their desire to submit written testimony. And so I look forward to receiving that testimony. That being said, it doesn't look like there's anyone here to testify on this bill, so. Yeah, did you want to, did you have some comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just that on the section that you identified, Revenue and Tax Criminal Investigation Supervisor, I'd like to ask that it be amended to reflect, to be consistent with the bill, that the director be the one to designate. And the only reason why I'm going to say that is that, number one, there's 2 LEO offices in Revenue and Tax. There's the Criminal Investigation Branch, which I was a part of, and also the Compliance Branch, which I was a part of. And I would be asked to keep it consistent with the way the bill is written, or the way the law is written, that it identifies the director, and only because there's 2 different branches, they play 2 different roles. As a matter of fact, I happened to be the representative at that time when the post first started for the department.
Thank you. All right, thank you for that, Senator. Senator Teitigui, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no issues with this legislation. I've been watching closely the post meetings that they were having and have some great concerns. But you'll be hearing from my office to your office a letter of recommendation to have a roundtable with the, or even an oversight, because of some of the concerns that I have will be addressed in the letter that I will send to you. But this bill, of course, Mr. Chair, about how many people sit on there that have voting rights right now?
Quite a few,
Quite
Senator.
a few, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm not
about
mistaken, the legislation
16,
requires
17.
only five voting to have quorum and a 5 vote, correct? Just 5. Too small. Yeah, I think that's something we might want to look into as well, Mr. Chair. I don't know, it's not part of this bill, and maybe it might be germane, but for only 5 members to vote when there's almost, I think, 14, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Chair, of members sitting on the Post Commission. So if we can, and by announcing it right now, I'm not sure if that's sufficient enough so that we can incorporate the increase of voting in that one. It might be.
I appreciate your input, Senator Teitigui, and also thank you for the heads up on the future action that you'll be taking relative to the Post Commission and your concerns. I look forward to addressing those concerns in the best way that I can.
Thank you, and happy Liberation Day to you guys.
Thank you so much, Senator Teitigui. Before I close on this bill, I would just like to note for the record that in my conversation with the director and deputy director of Rev and Tax, they did echo the sentiments that were raised by my good colleague here on the left. And if there's no further testimony on Bill number 71-37 COR, that will conclude this public hearing on that bill. We'll take a short recess, like about this short, and we'll be back with our public hearing on our next bill. Sidus Masi. And we are back after the short recess to hear testimony now on Bill number 91-37 COR, an act to add a new subsection 3134 of Article 1, Chapter 3, Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 17, Guam Code and annotated relative to temporary employment of Guam Department of Education and retired facilities and maintenance personnel, sponsored by Senator Joe S. San Augustine and myself. And again, I'd like to recognize my colleagues joining us, Senator Tello Taitagui and Senator Joe S. San Augustine. And as the main sponsor of the bill, I'd like to defer to him to discuss it before we hear testimony. Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ahafide everyone, and Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman, for hearing Bill 91-37, which I introduced to assist our Guam Department of Education temporary hire retired facilities and maintenance personnel, and also as you as the co-sponsor. I also want to thank you for co-sponsoring this legislation. And as we all know, ARP federal funds will expire next year, and the Department of Education has struggled to keep its campuses maintained due to the lack of personnel in their facilities and maintenance division. This legislation will allow DOE to hire individuals who retire in the division to come back to help maintain and keep our facilities in a proper and adequate state that fulfills the requirements to conduct safe and healthy classrooms for our school children. Additionally, the bill proposed that retirees who return for this division will not lose their retirement pension as they are reemployed by the department. By hiring these individuals, it will help DOE utilize ARP funds or whatever other funds that they do have, while addressing the multitude of problems they face in getting our schools up to par. As this proposal may seem small, it was declared months ago that the need for facility maintenance personnel was urgently needed, as their division has seen drastic decrease in personnel over the last decade. I look forward to hearing any testimony and seek your leadership to report this measure out so we can get DOE additional tools for success. Jesus Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator San Augustine, and we'll begin the hearing testimony in the order that we signed in, and we'll start with the new superintendent of the Guam Department of Education, Dr. E. Kenneth Swanson. Dr. Swanson, good afternoon.
Thank you, and good afternoon. We've been spending a lot of time together.
Sure have. My roommate, he's my new roommate, guys.
I don't know how far to carry my sense of humor at this point, so I'll remain in some sort of level of decorum so that we don't get across purposes. Half a day, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come before you and provide testimony on Bill 91-37 COR, which authorizes the Guam Department of Education to temporarily hire retired facilities and maintenance personnel to provide safe, healthy, and clean school facilities and to comply with Every Child is Entitled to an Adequate Public Education Act. Currently, GOD's Facilities and Maintenance Division is comprised of 66 full-time positions, of which 24 or 36% are vacant. Facilities and maintenance staffing has seen a downward trend in the last 6 years. From 2018 to 2020, facilities and maintenance averaged 70 full-time positions with an average of 14 or 20% vacancies. In the last 2 years, F&M staffing pattern decreased to an average of 67 positions, with average vacancies increasing to 28 or 42%. The need to fill and retain maintenance position is apparent in these figures, and even more pressing when compounded with the new regulatory requirements and facilities concerns that face our island's public schools. The department continues to make concerted efforts to recruit and fill F&M vacancies. GDOE recently participated in the University of Guam's Spring 2023 job fair and has also announced continuous employment opportunities for facilities and maintenance. We are in the process of hiring positions in carpentry, plumbing, and general maintenance supervisor. Currently, we are seeking to hire welders, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, equipment operators, refrigeration and automotive mechanics, building maintenance, and plumbing supervisors. The ability to hire retired individuals with an appropriate skill set and institutional familiarity regarding the conditions of GDOE's facilities allows immediate action to address long-standing facility issues within our public schools. The number of eligible F&M retirees for potential hiring is 32. Considering the current vacancies and number of potential retirees who are eligible to return, the bill could have a positive impact on GDOE's ability to fill current F&M vacancies. Additionally, in an increase in recruitment efforts, GDOE would like to recommend for this body to consider retirees from other government agencies who have similar skill sets to increase the pool of skilled workers from which GDOE can select. Further, Section 3134A restricts the temporary F&M employees from receiving sick or annual leave. GDOE would like to request for this body to consider inclusion of a fixed amount of sick days be provided to the limited-term F&M employees, understanding the demand and the labor-intensive nature of our positions. GDOE supports the legislative intent of Bill 91-37 and support in it provides F&M division. I would like to thank you and on behalf of the department for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of Bill 91-37. We are hopeful for this passage. GDOE remains committed to working with 37th Legislature to serve our island's public school students and improving educational facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. From the Guam Education Board, the Vice Chairwoman, Ms. Maria Gutierrez.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, former colleague, Senator San Agustin, and Senator Telotay. Thank you for being here. First of all, I'm not really testifying on behalf of as a board member. I'm testifying as a private citizen who has been with DOE since 1991 as a board member, and then took a break and came back in 2004 with my colleague up there. When Acting Superintendent Judy Wampat brought this to my attention, and I said, you know, I support this, because those that have retired or DOE, they have the knowledge, the experience, even though they may not have the educational master, bachelor, doctorate degree, but these were the true facility and maintenance personnel. And Senator San Agustin knows because we and I worked together. He was handling facility and maintenance at DOE. That's why I support this bill, but I like to make some recommendation because I want this, that when they come back, they be protected. And when we did the regional, it was really great because you have the north, you have the central, you have the southern. There was no issue on school facilities because this team goes around the schools. They finish Finnegaza, they go to Machanana, all these things, same as southern. Lord and behold, when I came back on the board again, like they say, malfunction, the regional was dismantled. No more. And I know those guys, because I see them. And said, you know, Mrs. G, I wish that we had the regional again. I said, talk to Senator San Agustin. Said, I'm a plumber. I was repairing a leaking faucet and a restroom at UP. There was an issue at Southern High School. I had to stop what I'm doing and go down there. And bad enough, they were using their own vehicle. And these were TRED's helper. So I know the history of those at the facility and maintenance, because many years back, there was I believe Public Works has so much TRED's helper. So they moved them to DOE facility and maintenance. So whenever there's a vacant position, a plumber 1, plumber 2, electrician, even though they wanted to apply, because before you don't need a high school diploma to work for the government of Guam. It was years later that they required for you to have a high school diploma. So some of them wanted to apply, but they didn't have the high school diploma. So they remain as TRED's helper. And some of them, I think, are still there as TRED's helper. So at the time, I did ask Fernandez, I said, you know, get HR to please audit. Let's audit this trades helper, because some of them are no longer trades helper. They're plumber, they're refrigeration technician. Give them an opportunity. They don't have a high school diploma, but if you know what you're doing as a classifier in HR, you equate the years of experience to a high school diploma. Because you can see that this job description now, years of experience and training. And I'll tell you, there is this Mr. Manel Chong. Maybe you know him. I don't think he has a high school diploma, but boy, you cannot fool him when it comes to carpentry. So I just want to make sure, senators, that when you work on this bill, make sure that when these retirees, the trades helpers, come back to apply, that they're not going to be told, oh, where's your high school diploma? We need to, you know, DOE is faced with shortage, and I know. Because when Billy Cruz was the building and maintenance superintendent, as he's very protective of his employees. Whenever somebody retired or resigned, when he wants to fill, next thing he found out, the FT is no longer there. And I worked with him, what happened to my FTE? Where did it go? They put it someplace else that is not in facility maintenance. So I just want to make sure, I support this bill, and in order to bring those retirees back and assure that they're not, because I don't think with the new HR administrator, Mrs. Ada, I don't think she'll do that. But I want them to be protected, and I say, where is your high school diploma? Because if you don't have, you know, it's required to have high school diploma. We need to protect them. If we want them to come back and help the DOE, because yes, facility and maintenance is a really big problem. And so now the senator knows that after he left. That's why when I continue to see that there's really, you know, in the committee, on the board we have facility and maintenance, or they call it safe and healthy schools. I see nothing is happening on that committee. That's why I choose to take that committee. And that's when I start going out to the schools. And that's when I start seeing the issues at the schools. And thank to Mr. Franklin Cooper, who was acting superintendent, and to Mr. Phil Tovis, because they were listening to me. As I know sometimes when they see my number in their phone, they're like, oh no, what's Mrs. G again? But, you know, so I just want to tell you guys, I support this bill as a private citizen, as a grandmother of a student who is on phase 3 that DOE put out. I want something done. Please bring them back as soon as possible. I know you have a session next week, if it's possible. And I know all of you 3 there will help us so that you can put it really on for your session. We need them. Now, I was reading this comments from Bureau BBMR. What bothered me here, okay, is that this bill does not provide an appropriation to fund such purposes. Okay, we may not have the funding. And I hear you saying ARP funding or what. I want the superintendent to look at every position at DOE that was funded on the ARP funding. Do we really need that? We have like 50 community program aid. Do we really need that? And let's put this, if there's no funding, put the funding into this to get this facility and maintenance people back. Because this is what's needed. So I'm sure he's listening to me, but because he knows already that if he doesn't listen, you know, where he's at. But we really need to know their position. And I believe Senator Tallow, in one of our hearings before, you asked how many were hired on under the ARP funding. I recall that you wanted to know. So we need to look at those positions that were hired under the ARP funding. Where are they? Are they at the schools or are they down at central office? Because we really, this is what we need now, is these people. So that's my testimony, and I'm in full support of this bill, and I urge all of those, even those that are not here, I'm not sure they're gonna read the report, that we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. G. I'd like to now turn it over to my colleagues for any questions, comments, concerns, starting with Senator Tello-Taitagui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the bill, of course, comes at a time that I'm sure the DOE is in desperate need. And I'm just concerned, though, when it comes to these hires that I know you've requested certain provisions on sick leave and annual leave, but do you see this as something that's just going to be for a short time, like for 1 year to hire because of the situation we're in right now, and then to go through the full process of what it is normally to hire a maintenance individual?
I may be corrected on this, but I don't see this as a long-term solution. And in the near term, we need the extra manpower. But as you well know, some of the work we have ahead of us is going to take several months to accomplish. And we need to, at the same time, we need to continue our recruiting and training efforts for younger employees as well.
Frank?
So basically, the law provides us with a tool for improving our recruitment efforts and getting a population base that normally wouldn't be eligible to return back to work because of their retirement benefits. So as the superintendent said, yes, I do think that, one, there's an immediate need due to obviously the conditions of our facilities, but also the shortage of manpower. Again, and moving forward, we are going to hire. So there is a funding basing that we're trying to fill permanent full-time employees. But right now, with the current situation, this will give us a base of getting some skilled workers who are familiar with our system, familiar with the work and facilities back into the workforce. And then as we go in time, it's really contingent upon how many other full-time employees are going to be qualified, eligible, and willing to stay with GDOE. But I think it bridges both and provides us with solutions.
Is this, so they would be hired as what? I mean, you're going into an unclassified position, correct?
Limited term full-time employees.
Yeah, LTAs. Okay, so there'll be a limited term, and okay, so it's anticipated that you may need them for about a year. I'm trying to see if the bill.
Correct. That's
for about a year, correct? Okay. Is there anything in here that allows you to revisit to make it a little bit longer? I mean, our schools didn't get the way they were in 1 year. It takes a little bit longer, and to repair it may have that same kind of consequences as far as length, time.
I didn't think anything was limiting us from extending past. So yeah, I think it provides us just with the avenue of having them as a recruitment base to join our workforce. And then it was specified as limited term full-time employees. So I'm hopeful that if the need arises, that it's a continuation of the services, that we can come back and make sure that we have this provision in law that we can reference to make sure that we can continue their services.
Okay, and have you had have all the potential negative impacts been weighed out here? Is there any kind of negative impact on this?
So I don't know if there's a negative impact. I'm thinking more positively, obviously, to get the support.
Okay.
The one thing I would say is, again, we read the testimony, is expanding that base to include also retirees into other government agencies who have the necessary skill set and capabilities. Therefore, we have a bigger pool, a bigger variety of actual technical skill set when it comes to carpentry, plumbing, electrical. Get them in our workforce, especially if they're experienced. Get them up to speed, put them in our facilities and maintenance division, and deploy them straight to the schools where they're much needed.
Okay. Will there be any additional requirements or certifications for hiring retirees?
I don't know if there's additional, as we heard our Vice Chair, Mrs. Gutierrez, we do want to look for some of the exceptions to the qualifications to get them in, but it'll follow the normal process of merit to make sure that they're qualified.
Well, I definitely full support any measure that would ensure safer classrooms and the school campuses to get up and running as soon as possible. So thank you so much for answering my questions, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. Senator St. Augustine?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to make clarification, the bill makes the amendment to the law, so there's no time period. If you just say 6 months, then it's 6 months. And I like the amendment that you requested from any other GovGuam agency that retired. And I think to clarify that what Ms. Gutierrez brought up about the high school diploma, no, if you're retired and you show you're retired, you got a shot at it. You're not a new employee per se. You're a retiree returning back to government service. And the other recommended amendments, my office will work with the chair so we can make it work. The goal here is to get the schools ready. I mean, we can't get it ready tomorrow, but we can sure make an effort to get it ready as soon as possible. And I'm hoping that when the school finally gets back on its feet and the facilities is moving, because the regional maintenance program was established by me when I was the chairman of the board. We created that to make it work, and it worked. It was easy. Everybody knew in the north who the northern maintenance people were. They actually knew who to call, and they didn't have to travel far, because we made sure the northern folks were the northern folks, the southern were the southern. The southern people actually were looking at it like, I don't have to drive up to Zigu. No, just drive around the schools. And a lot of them would carpool because everything was close by. And they knew where to put their tools because unfortunately back then the department couldn't provide tools. So all the maintenance people were providing their own. I'm hoping it's not happening now, but I'm hoping it's starting to change slowly, okay? But with that, I have advised the chair that all the amendments that are requested, my staff will put it together and submit it to him so that he can take a look at it and see how we can move forward in that. Otherwise, thank you for your support.
Thank you, Senator St. Augustine. And yeah, the committee will do what we can to move the bill along expeditiously. And my mother's brother actually works in maintenance at one of the schools. And, you know, a lot of the conversation has been, especially this year, people from my generation and you know, a little bit younger, talking about how things used to be at the schools and how we used to have facilities and maintenance staff, and you know, they would be on site at a school, and if you had a sink, the guy would come and fix it right there. And over the years, we've seen the facilities and maintenance division. I mean, it's really a handful of employees who are stretched too far and too thin. So, you know, I really hope that this is the beginning of the return of the heyday of that whole division. And I mean, Lord knows they could definitely use the help. And the idea, again, is if we get our schools to come into compliance once and for all. I'm not saying it's going to be set it and forget it, but we always talk about that maintenance issue. And I'm really hoping that we can not just stand up more employees and experienced employees in the facilities and maintenance division, but like you said, use them as a kind of a recruiting base so that we can have a thriving division to provide that routine maintenance so that we don't fall behind again. So thank you so much for your testimony on this bill, and we'll conclude testimony on this bill and move on to the next. Okay, we'll now hear testimony on bill number 105-37LS, an act to add a new subsection 4124B3 of Chapter 4, Title 17, Guam Code, annotated relative to allowing school and village beautification as service learning hours, sponsored by Senator Joe S. St. Augustine. And with that being said, I'd like to toss it over to the bill's author to provide an opening statement. Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Buenas and Alfred. Bill 105-37LS LS, introduced by myself, is an act to add a new section 4124B and 3 of Chapter 4, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to allowing school and village beautification as a student service learning hours. This measure was proposed by Ukudu High School student LFA Escano, who served as my senator counterpart during Island Leadership Day in April. Her intent was to promote student involvement within our community and environment. Our public high school students are mandated to complete 75 hours of service learning. If this measure passes, our students will be allowed to do 10 of those hours within our villages by assisting with village beautification and cleanup, and 10 hours of school campus beautification. This ensures our students are involved within our community and their schools. It helps students to build on the meaning of Inafa Maoli within our island, and more importantly, owning responsibility as students and stakeholders of our school community. I look forward to a healthy discussion and any suggestions from my colleagues and our stakeholders. Jesus Marcy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator, and we will start the testimony again with the superintendent. Superintendent?
I'll say, just briefly, I support the bill, but I do have my deputy here to give you more detailed information.
Great, thank you, sir. First, I want to say I'm really excited about testifying on something that's actually in my area of my job description, which is curriculum and instruction. Service learning is really an important part of our curriculum now, since it was instituted several years back. We're in support of the bill. In fact, we had a real quick discussion with...
Can you say your name so everybody knows who you are?
Yes,
Thank you,
my
Joe.
apologies. Joe Sanchez, Deputy Superintendent for Curriculum and Instructional Improvement for Guam DOE. So we had our discussion with several principals. In fact, all the high school principals were able to chime in, as well as a couple of the interns that were participating in the high school program and some of the interns at central office. And we're all generally in support of the bill. However, we just wanted to make sure that there were some technical corrections. We'll write these down and send it to you. So for example, in your statement where it's 20 hours of the 75, in several sentences here, it shows that it's actually 10 additional hours. We're okay with additional hours or be a part of it, so just to have it consistent. But if it were to increase by 20, that we don't think that would be a big problem. But it's just clarifying in the bill so that's it's consistent. The second one is, so it's not left up to interpretation. Technically, the 9th grade class of 2027 would be the graduating class of 2030. So we think that based on the statements, your intent is to have it start with next year's graduating class. So it would actually be not the 9th grade class, it would be considered the graduating class of 2027. Yeah, so we'll just go ahead and make that change so that it starts with next year's seniors. Also with the statement where it says, and every year thereafter, we recommend just striking that because that implies that every year they would have an additional 20 hours. So basically, it would just say, and for every subsequent class. So start with the freshman class, and then every class after that. And then lastly, we have a request to just change the title or the program to community service, because one of the challenges that we've had over the last several years is service learning has a very particular set of requirements in the education field. It's directly related to a curriculum. It has to have standards. It has to have, a lot of guidelines attached to it, where a lot of the examples that were given by even senators, even our former acting superintendent, when we talked to her about it when she was former speaker, that majority of the examples that were given, participating in coastal cleanup, passing out food to individuals in need, all of those examples are more community service type activities. And we believe that if you changed it to community service, we'd have more flexibility to do both service learning as well as internships and other types of activities. So any activities that allow them to participate in a community type activities. It's just that service learning has so many different kind of guidelines, and we just haven't really been following that spirit. And again, when most people talk about the activities that they want to do for service learning, it's really more appropriate to community service rather than actual service learning. But that's basically it. We're in full support of the bill, subject to those corrections.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Senator Teitigui?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator, I'm sorry. Mrs. G, you had to testify on this bill too? I'm sorry, so sorry,
Thank
Mrs.
you.
G, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Maria Gutierrez, and I am the vice chair of the board, but again, I'm here to testify as a private citizen, as the advisor of iBox for 10 years, and I'm still going to be the advisor. It's just a temporary vacation for me. And thank you, Senator San Agustin, because that student is my iBox. That's the student that I took to Phoenix, Arizona to participate at the annual conference. You know, this service learning, and there's also an SOP at the Department of Education. It's also board policy. And there was a time just before this last school year, the year before, that there was an island beautification. And a lot of students went out there and participate, and they all were getting service learning. And I commend the principals that accepted the service learning for the students that went out there during the cleanup. In fact, one student from Ukudu, he graduated already. He came and joined the iBox when we were cleaning the upper Tuman with his younger brother and sister, and he was a sophomore, and he told me that, you know, he has to find a way to earn service learning because the way that service learning SOP was set is kind of hard. So I told him, okay, you do this. Come to the bus stop here in Upper Tuman every Saturday and pick up the trash, and we will arrange with your principal, thanks to Mrs. Begonia Flores, who is really a very accommodating principal, student-centered, so you can earn your service learning, because he stays right there at the apartment in Upper Tuman. For this boy has done that for the whole school year. Every Saturday, he goes to all those bus stops, even if it says adopted by the Korean Association, adopted by the whatever, he goes there and clean. And he'll call me, Mrs. G, this is the many hours that I spend there. Then I'll send that. I said, okay, tomorrow you go to Mrs. Begonia Flores and give her the hours that you clean. So, and then the Girls Power, they also have the Talent Girl Power, sorry. They have students that are helping cleaning the beautification. And that's how students are earning their service learning. Because this is a way that we can help those kids. Especially they're staying in a housing area like they do, Lujan, whatever, to go there and just clean the bus stop. Beautify the area around that. And I know a lot of the students are doing that in the Dededo area, the Lujan Terrace area, the Gurura. So I am full support because I know about this service learning. It started in 2015. And I have brought to the attention of Superintendent Fernandez, we need to look at the policy. We look at the SOP. Is it going to really work? Is it working for the kids? Because I know when this first started, there were some teachers that are really having a difficult time, because it has to be in the school. So I am in full support, and I'm very proud that it's the iBox that I supervise that introduced this. And I'm so proud when Senator San Agustin told me that, hey, you know this iBox? I said, sure. So thank you for listening to the student voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. G. I would just say on my end, I have, since coming into office, I've just been in receipt of a lot of concerns from parents about service learning because of the, I'm just going to say burden that it places on them having to, especially, our people aren't the richest people, having to drive children from here to there to meet these different service learning requirements, whether it's volunteering at a 5K at 4 in the morning or going to a cleanup or whatever. So that's just been my experience. I understand the program and what it's supposed to do and how it instills that sense of responsibility, and it's tied to a curriculum, like you had said. And I actually love the idea that Senator San Agustin has to kind of get these kids to work, right? Invest in their school. You know, and I went off island on a trip way back, and there was an elementary school. It was in Bali, and school started like 7:30, but at 7 a.m., walking by the school, and you see these little kids with brooms, and they're like sweeping up the front of the school. And I'm not saying I want your kids to pick up a broom and sweep up the school, but what I am saying is that it gives them that sense of ownership into the facility. So I get where Senator St. Augustine's coming from, but I do just want to kind of hedge that with just the concerns that I have received, very real concerns, especially families in the lower economic scale about just the burden that it places on them. So that's just my thoughts. Senator Tydegui?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, while you were talking, I was looking over at the students that are sitting over here, you know, and hoping one of them would come to the front table and testify on this, because this has to do with your generation. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I want to see our kids away from the computers, you know, and out doing something healthy and working out. And I'm looking to see if they have computers. They're all writing, so that's nice. You're keeping up your writing skills instead of typing it out. But is anyone over here ninth grade? No, right? None of you are ninth graders here? You're a ninth grader? Okay, so this, if I'm not mistaken, this act shall be effective on September 1st, 2023. So I wonder if, would this, Mr. Chair, require her to have this service, and maybe you should be coming. So it would, this bill would affect you. And are you familiarized with this bill? Okay, it's going to require you 10 additional hours of village island beautification for school campus beautification, you know, on top of, right, the 75 that's required already on service learning. Yeah, that's the one that we have to,
Yeah,
right,
just have to clarify
make an
that.
amendment to. So that's what is your name? Amanda. So Amanda, I mean, it looks like you're an active individual, but how do you feel about this, you know, requiring you 10 hours additional to do something for beautification for our island? Does that sound good? Putting you on the spot.
Senator, you're putting my summer intern on the spot.
I know, you're summer intern.
They didn't sign up for this.
Well, I'm just curious looking at you there, and as you get older, I mean, these things are really important, you know, these bills, and it's good to see that you guys are paying attention, taking notes down, and you can tell your other classmates that this bill is probably going to go through. You know, it's something that I support too as well, and of course the author of the legislation as well as the oversight chair. So so tell your students, get ready. 10 hours more of beautification, which I think is a good thing, and anything to get you out and healthy, right, Joe?
So just to clarify a point, so one of the recommendations that we had is to clarify that sentence. That seemed, I mean, we're not lawyers, right? But it seems to imply that it's 10 additional hours every year, but it seems like the spirit is 20 total hours.
Total.
Added, either added to the 75 or inclusive within the 75.
I see.
If either one, it's minimal, because
It's
even if you add it,
inclusive, Joe. It's supposed to
Oh,
include,
okay.
it's all
Yeah.
part of the package.
Oh, I
oh
see.
yeah, so it's
Yeah, yeah.
not, so then it's not adding more hours, it's just delineating what those particular hours are. Oh, another comment that some of our students made is a large percentage of the service learning hours that are earned is through some type of beautification already. Like coastal cleanup is one of the biggest ones, because that knocks out 7 hours or 6 hours for a lot of students. You know, beautification task forces, and when they do that summer internship, summer interns are not allowed to earn service learning at the same time they get paid. But what they do is they always add additional hours that they don't get paid for. They use that for service learning. So a lot of that is beautification and that type of work.
Well, thank you so much for that explanation and clarifying for me. So I greatly appreciate your comments, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Tydegui. That being said, Senator St. Augustine, would you like to close? You're good? No? Okay. Thank you. That concludes testimony on Bill number 105-37 LS. Thank you so much for your testimony, and we now move on to Bill 113-37 LS, an act to amend subsection 3103P of Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to restoring the Guam Department of Education management audit requirements, which I also authored along with co-sponsors, Speaker Therese Terlahi and Senator Sabina Flores Perez. And I think pretty self-explanatory. The bill, if enacted, will restore the GDOE management audit mandate. Now, the last and only GDOE management audit was done by Evergreen Solutions in 2009. The focus of the recommendation was the elimination of expensive practices, the closing of FQ Sanchez School, which had less than 200 students at the time, and other cost-cutting measures. The recommendations, if implemented, would have saved taxpayers tens of millions of dollars, and obviously also introduced this bill with the support of several current and former Guam Education board members, and myself as well would like to see this return to a management audit instead of the use of an assessment, because audits obviously deal more with black and white facts and numbers, which we definitely need to make good decisions and informed decisions moving forward. So 308 now. We'll begin testimony on this one, and I'm assuming, oh yes, Superintendent. Okay, we'll go ahead and start with Superintendent Swanson, sir.
Good day, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My comments are going to be not as the official capacity as Superintendent of Guam DOE, but as a professional who has been engaged in school system accreditation and evaluation with the Cognia Group for the last 5 years. So I've been doing this work across the world on a regular basis, and I had some. I am not concerned with the term audit. It means different things to different people. It means a lot to someone like my colleague Frank here, who is an auditor, and we get audited frequently. So as I look at the language in the bill, it's not really a problem until we get into Section P, because Section P talks about different domains that are to be audited, and I have real concerns with some of those areas. And this is me professionally. I also know that through the accreditation process with one of the entities that does this work, we can address all of these and actually provide metrics that will give you answers that you need to make good decisions. But for example, I see several areas of potential abuse and misinterpretation. The language provided in line 2 leaves a broad area of interpretation with such terms as administrators. It represents a broad class of employees with a variety of responsibilities that may or may not engage in any number of several hundred established board policies. Depending on their responsibility, which ones? I mean, we have several thousand policies, so that becomes a question. Item 3 is dealing with the evaluation of instructional personnel to meet curriculum goals. And I question, first of all, what are we referencing in terms of a metric? Are we talking about SAT scores? Are we talking about some other assessment, college entrance rates? So we don't really know. And I don't know that you want to spell it out in legislation, but I don't see implementing instructions or scope that goes with this, and that's where the areas can become quite confusing. Our normal process of accreditation, and I've not worked with the Western Association for, well, let's say over 40 years. So I don't know exactly what their standards are. We're going through that process right now. But there's another institution that accredits schools here on the island. They do several private schools, and they do all the DODEA schools worldwide. That's Cognia. They have 30 specific standards that address all of the areas that you have listed in this law and more, with specific rubrics that when that work is done, it actually generates a score. So there are other ways to look at this. If we're doing it through the accreditation and systematic continuous improvement process, we're in good shape. We can do that work that way and provide the feedback to the legislature. My concern is that who's going to do the audit? What's their background? What's their professional knowledge and understanding? So that's the question that's in my mind, and that concludes my remarks. I wanted to have a longer written presentation for you, but you've kept me busy on some other things.
Yeah, thank you. That's why I'm trying to keep this short.
So I'll keep it short, but I see the intent, I
Yeah.
agree with the intent, but we have to be really cautious about the mechanics of implementation.
I just want to say, Superintendent, just for the record, all of the concerns that you mentioned are part of the existing law. All my bill does is take out the word assessment and insert the word audit. So, but these concerns are noted, and I'll take them back to the committee, and we'll see what we can finagle to address some of the issues that you
And I
raised.
would be happy to help with that work if called upon.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Mr. Sanchez, please state your name for the record.
Thank you. Joe Sanchez, Deputy Superintendent of Curriculum and Instructional Improvement, and I'm actually the project lead for the district level accreditation for WASC, the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. And just like as the superintendent said, I personally don't have a issue with the term audits in education settings, not financial settings, but in education settings, the term audits and assessments and evaluations tend to be kind of overlapped a lot depending on the organization or depending on the individuals that are utilizing that terminology. So it's very common that documents would have interchangeable language. That's why in most research studies or in most reports there would be a glossary that explains what that means, right? So again, the shift to audit, it doesn't trigger anything with me. But we're going to let Frank go last because, yeah, it triggers a lot with, not triggers, but he has concerns about that particular language. But for us, I agree with the superintendent that our accreditation process answers a lot of these questions. We piloted the WASC process for districts for the entire West region in 2015. So Guam actually did that for the organization, and now we're up for accreditation again this year. So it answers a lot of the curriculum questions here. I will say I'm not familiar with the Cognia process, but WASC is not as tight as a regular audit would be on the financial side. We do identify financials, we do talk about budgets, but they're in more of a sense of conversation like, oh, how much money do you get? Do you get enough money, so and so? It's not at the level of an actual audit. So if your intent is to actually get financial audits and do metrics that allow you to determine efficiencies and whatnot, then we'll leave that to the finance folks. But from the education curriculum side, it seems fine. It seems aligned to our accreditation process. I do want to point out that we're really trying to align several different reports and processes. For example, by law, we have to produce what's called an annual State of Public Education report. That's an annual report that goes to the legislature, goes to the governor and everybody else. It talks about test scores, it talks about dropout rates and things like that, and we've been doing that for several years. That's generated through the school report cards. And I know this is very familiar to our former chair here, but the school report cards, every school has to produce those. We have our strategic plan that has its own reporting mechanism, and of course our district level accreditation. So our research and planning office is really working hard with all of our principals and central office folks to align those reports so that the formatting is the same, because it's really just the same data that you're asking for, and it kind of gets tedious when the formats are all different and the statements are all different. We also have a citizen-centric report that's very similar to the school report card that we're just trying to align. So really, hoping that this does not end up being a totally separate report, we think it's something that can fit into our current process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez.
Frank can talk about the audit word.
Half a day. Frank Kupeners, Acting Deputy of Finance and Administrative Services. So at least from my standpoint, and I had an opportunity to go through the bill, and as you said, Senator, it's really a strike over of the term assessment to audit. And in terms of auditing professions and auditing professionals, that means a very different set of skills. Traditionally, and the work can be accomplished, and generally in a work like this, when you're dealing with consultants, you're dealing with people external from a department, external from government, coming in and making recommendations based on best practices. When you're dealing with auditors, there's set standards there's the sufficiency and reliability of the evidence, and then it also comes with findings and corrective actions, which is a little bit different in the approach. So if this is something that truly is limiting in making it that auditors perform the work, and professional auditors such as financial auditors or government auditors, I think we may have some issues in terms of who can complete the work, who can do the assessments, and even the competitive pool for doing just that. And then in reviewing the fiscal note, and I didn't have an opportunity to chime in on the fiscal note, but the fiscal note does say that if this is going to be something that's contracted out and goes about, there isn't a direct appropriation again for this. I obviously want to see that this be successful. The assessments are necessary. I won't necessarily call it an audit per se. I think we're going to use that word pretty generically or broadly. And again, if we can get it done, we want to make sure compliance, right? Compliance is at the forefront. We want to make sure that we can accomplish the assessment/audit to be completed, and it's not an unfunded mandate. The last one I recall that was being done was Evergreen. That took a considerable amount of time. If you read that, that's a huge document, and that was cost of upwards of about $160,000. So again, if we look at this from a perspective of, do we really want this per se to be conducted by auditors? I don't feel the law says that, but I do think it uses the term pretty broadly. If we do want this to be done by auditors per se, then it goes out and there's a limited competitive pool. You guys are aware that there's very limited financial firms that can do a financial audit. And again, we do have the OPA that can do some performance and government audits that can step in. But in reading the language of the law, I just wanted to make sure that there was some flexibility or clarity that this doesn't necessarily per se mean that it's conducted by government professional auditors or financial auditors for the record. And then in terms of if this is going to be something that's going to be mandated and the requirements, I believe, was the 5 years interval set by the GEB. If it does require outside funding source, right now it'll pull for the general fund. I do think that it's going to be critical for us, if it's going to be contracted, we identify the sufficient funding to make sure that it doesn't become an unfunded mandate and we can accomplish the goal.
First of all, I'm very glad that you all love the bill. And I guess you really were triggered by that word audit. I mean, management audits, are traditionally intended to evaluate the actions of managers and not necessarily the financial statements. And I think kind of why I went down this road was I was reading with great interest some of the recommendations that were made at the last management audit in 2009, and one of them was to eliminate assistant principal positions and to look at other ways to downsize the cost of the central office. And I understand, that sometimes I don't like looking in the mirror, you know what I mean? But sometimes that's what's required to make those, I don't want to say the word assessment, but to make those necessary determinations about what cuts, if any, we can make to streamline a department, to put resources where they might be better used. No offense, I think you're all doing a great job. But yeah, thank you for your testimony, and I guess Senator Tydegui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that explanation. And it seems to be very simple, just changing it. And when you do something like that, I always think of how much is it going to cost. That's the first thing that pops in my mind, right? And according to the fiscal note that we got from BBMR, it said the Bureau had sought input on the fiscal impact of the proposed Bill 113-37 LS from GDOE on May 10th, 2023, with a follow-up request on May 18th, 2023. The Bureau has not received any official comments as of the date for this fiscal note. However, the Bureau does anticipate that Bill 113-37 has a potential impact for additional funding requirements to GDOE should GDOE's Internal Audit Office seek contractual services externally to conduct such management audits. However, such estimated cost impact cannot be determined at this time. As such, our department, are dependent on solicited audit proposals for qualified auditing firms that specialize in management and curricular audit for schools and schools school districts and the type of frequency of these management audits that are to be performed. I don't know if you received this. You did? So can you answer to the question they have with regards, is this going to be, however they feel there's going to be a cost impact?
So that's to my comments earlier, as I was alluding to, is depending on if this is going to be a structured audit and we need to go outside of the department and contract that out. The Evergreen audit, which was done in, I believe, 2009, was about $160,000. Right now, if we were to say that this is going to be done by an auditing firm, we put that in today's cost, we're going to need a source of funding to outsource it. We didn't, at the time, provide the input into the fiscal note because not understanding if this is going to be something that could be worked in partnership with different consultants through an accreditation team and a component unit of audit to look at some performance. So there was some clarity that we needed to understand in order to get to better costing information. But yes, from the standpoint of the fiscal note, understanding if the work is going to be completed outside of GDOE, we will need some funding to implement the law.
And do you have a kind of a guesstimate?
Again, based on the Evergreen audit, again, that was in 2009. Those costs are going to be understated. That was about 160. If you look at our financial audit, which is really just a review of our financial statements and our compliance to federal regulations, that's already upwards of, and it's under 150, but upwards of 130.
130,000?
Yes, so we're going to, no, that's for our financial audit. This takes into a broad scope of work, reviewing a lot more than that. So you're going to be looking at upwards of that 150,000 mark, I would obviously anticipate.
Did you say 150?
Yes.
Okay.
Upwards of
150,000.
150 is my best guesstimate at this point.
Okay. And Frank, how, considering this was done, back in 2009, how long, or even further, I think it was, no, it was about 2009, 2010. What is the, even in your profession of going from school to school that you mentioned all around the world, doing assessments and audits, what is the standard operating procedures when it comes to assessments or audits? Are they done on an annual basis? Because it's obvious we haven't done one in quite a bit since the last one.
The process that we're working with, there's a continuous engagement with the school system throughout the cycle, and right now it's a 6-year cycle. They just switched it from 5 to 6.
6 years?
It's a 6-year cycle.
Okay.
You're working in
Can you just talk a
consultation
little
with
bit more into the mic?
with a
Yeah.
membership. Okay, the organization has you're enrolled and paying for this a little bit at a time through the course of the year, so it's not a lump sum at the end. But it really is, the cost is driven by the size of the school system. So a school district of 10,000 students and staff does not get charged the same as one of 25 or 30,000, or like Clark County, Nevada, 300,000 students.
I see.
It's a much bigger operation.
Okay, but it's done like you said every 6 years, is that?
Right. The final report comes out at the end of the cycle, or wherever you happen to fall in it, but that report comes out, and then there's an interim progress check 2 years after the report. So for example, the schools that I just did, the findings that we had will have to be addressed over the next 2 years and reported back on, and at the same time you have a consultant that's working with you all along the way to do the progress checks.
So is this something that, oh, Frank, you were going to say something, I didn't.
No, just to add to that, again, that's a cyclical assessment, 5 to 6 years. If you're asking about the
5 to
timeliness of an audit, we're required by law from a financial audit perspective. There's more broad authority when you see OPA audits. They go backwards in time and they scope out the review. So it's a very different approach. Again, depending on who you're asking to do the work, I don't believe that this falls under traditional audit requirements. So I think we're going to have a combination of what can be audited and what can be done with consultants and assessments.
So it sounds to me like an assessment is usually, then it's usually, I mean, an audit, you're saying every 5, 6 years, but an assessment is a little more loose. So is it usually every year or every other year? Or like you said, I know it's a continued process, but I'm looking at this as on a financial side, because how much is this going to cost the general fund to fund you? is it covered by federal funds? Something like this can actually be seeked out through federal funding?
This is a local mandate, so I believe that local funding would have to...
General fund?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. And the fiscal note does mention that, again, once implemented, if we're not able to in-source it and we outsource it, there will be an impact to the general fund
Yeah.
appropriations.
I'm just wondering if it's going to be annually. The impact is going to happen annually.
Correct, depending on again, the nature of the review and the cycle of the review. It could be an annual cost, it could be something that's built into a contract and paid incrementally through the process. Depending on what the assessment scope of work looks like, timing of the events and deliverables, and what the department actually needs in the law, and I believe that 5-year cycle is going to come up. The board is going to set the intervals on the reporting requirements.
Okay, and Frank, when do you anticipate to start, if this bill should pass, when do you start doing this assessment?
If the bill passed, then we go immediate to looking at the contents that are required in the bill. We'll go out and scope it. I think it's going to be appropriate for us to get costing information, so there'll probably be a request for information.
Oh, okay, so it sounds to me like this is something that won't happen until next year.
I think we're going to scope out and see who can bid,
I think,
and then,
Well, you
go
know,
through that
slow.
process.
Is it involving procurement? And then forget it, you know. But, okay, so we're looking at additional costs, and well, this bill just came out, so I'm sure it's not in the budget bill to cover this. But I thank you for the question. It just prepares us as we understand this bill is going to have some kind of cost associated with it. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tydegui. My apologies. We didn't get the opportunity to hear the testimony from Ms. Maria Gutierrez. I'm so sorry, Mrs. G, but you're recognized.
You're forgiven this time. You know, when I sit back in the front here, you know I have to say something. Anyway, my name is Maria Gutierrez. I'm the Vice Chair of the Guam Education Board, but I'm not here this afternoon to testify on behalf of the board. I'm here to testify by myself as a private citizen, because when this Evergreen solution consultant came here, because there was a senator who introduced for DOE to have a management audit, Senator San Agustin and I were there. And we received the final audit report on April 13, 2009. And it's 366 pages. And there were recommendations there. And then my term ends, we were in the hybrid board, my term ends, and that was it. So, and yes, it says audit, because when that bill for DOE to have it's audit, not assessment. And yes, my favorite word is audit, okay? Because I used to work for Civil Service Commission, and we do audits on all government of Guam, GG1, and I was assigned to DOE. That's why I like the audit. You know, in the report, senators, if you really read that there's audit. And yes, there were areas there that say that, that the Evergreen gave the recommendation, and I'm glad that she read about the principles, overloaded of principles, right? And it's true, why should you have an assistant principal with an enrollment of less than 300 students? And a school that has 700 students doesn't have an assistant principal. And that was the recommendation from Evergreen. Even to the point that they brought out there were so many school aides, but we didn't pay attention to the school aides because that's for the schools. In the audit, they said shut down FQ Sanchez. The board didn't accept that because, you know, the community of FQ Sanchez were at the board meeting, and Senator Sanaka is the chair, and they had all this big poster board. Don't you, if you approve, don't enter UMADAC, because you're not going to get out there alive. And it's true, because we were there. I still recall we were in the back of the old DOE administration room, and he was there with another board member, and I was there. And really, here they come together. We did. So the hybrid board was the one who shut down F.Q. Sanchez. The hybrid board, it's not the Guam policy board. So I know, yes, I read, DOE should know that I read everything. I don't care how many pages. I read the Bill 150-31 that became public law. And yes, I saw that the only one that was testifying there was former Superintendent Dr. Underwood. I read the committee report. It says audit. It didn't say assessment. So somewhere, somehow, maybe when they're voting for this bill, they put in assessment instead of audit. But it was audit. It was always audit. That's what the board wants, is audit.
Yeah. Mrs. G, I did research this, and repeal of the management audit, it came in the form of a floor amendment to Bill 150-31, which was later enacted as Public Law 31-91. Neither the bill as introduced nor the version reported out of committee contain any of that language. The bill that was passed and signed into law, however, changed all references to management audit to management assessment, which is why we're here today. And I looked, there was no readily available record to reveal who proffered that amendment, so it's like a big mystery.
But I still support that it should be audit. We need to audit. We need to audit. Because I'll tell you, there are programs that are being piloted at DOE, and we have not seen any, it's all assessment. We haven't seen anything that how well is that program. That's why I really like the audit. Because when you do the audit, everybody will be put on notice. Assessment, it's just going to be, we'll wait for it. Audit, everybody be on notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. G, for your testimony. And again, I apologize. Senator San Agustin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I like that Ms. Gutierrez is here because we were on the board together when the Evergreen came out. And I like the idea of the audit. But one of the key factors you're facing today is then we were a governing board. The board dictates and tells the superintendent what he needs to make sure gets fixed and figure it out. Now it's about the board come out of a policy on how to convince the superintendent. I have a bill that's introduced to change that. Put it at the governing, make them accountable, the superintendent responsible. But for this issue, the audit, I fully support this. Just do the audit, and when it says on the fiscal note, there's no impact today to anybody, because why? When the board says they're going to do this, they get a cost estimate and they take it out of height until you put it in the budget the following year, or whatever year you're going to do it. And it's every 5 years. And then you just work it. You just work the program, because the program will work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. Is there any further testimony? Is there no one else? Okay. If there are no further questions or comments, this concludes the public hearing. The committee will continue to accept written statements on today's hearing on all of the bills within 10 business days from today, which may be sent to my office on the second floor of the Guam Congress Building at 163 Chalan Santa Papa in Agutnia. You may also send your statements to us at malafunction@guamlegislature.org. Thank you all for your participation, especially my colleagues, Senator Taitagui and Senator San Agustin. This public hearing is adjourned at 3:35 Chamorro Standard Time. Guahusi Senator Chris Malafunction Barnett, está adjo.
And happy Liberation Day, everyone.